Hi, and welcome to TheFIX, the podcast about Lightroom, Photoshop, post-processing, and all the cool and creative things we get to do with our images after the shoot. I'm Seán Duggan, and in this episode, I'm going to show you how to make mirrored images in Lightroom. In order to do that, we're going to have to dive into the print module and modify some existing print templates in order to create the mirrored image format. Stay with us for what is sure to be a reflective episode. Well, it's the first week of 2016, so Happy New Year to you, wherever out there in the world, out there in internet land that you're tuning in from. As I mentioned in the introduction for the show, in this episode I'm going to take a look at how to create mirrored images or reflected images in Lightroom. Now, before I get too much further into it, let's just pause and quickly define what a mirrored or reflected image is for those viewers or listeners who may be unfamiliar with that term. So a mirrored image is one where you have a single image, and then you make a copy of that image and flip it so that it becomes a mirror of the first one. And you arrange them together to create that reflected image look. And the great thing about mirrored images is that there is a strong symmetrical component because it is a reflected version of the original image. And the human brain is hardwired to really appreciate and love symmetry. There have been numerous scientific studies over the years that have proven this, but you don't need a scientific study to realize that for yourself. You just need to look at an effective mirrored image and realize how visually pleasing and satisfying it is. Now, I think of mirrored images as somewhat of a guilty pleasure because they're just so easy to create, and when you use the right images, they can be, as I mentioned, very, very satisfying and visually effective and very pleasing to look at. There's a little bit of a kind of an instant gratification component because all you have to do is mirror the image together and boom, you're done. And oftentimes it does look very cool. And I do believe that both guilty pleasures and instant gratification is something that is good to indulge in from time to time. All things in moderation, of course. So anyway, in terms of mirrored images, the types of images that work really well, typically with this format, are natural subjects, so nature scenes, rocks, trees, lichen on rocks, plant forms, things like that. Although sometimes architectural subjects can be very effective as well, particularly more abstract or close-up architectural details as opposed to scenes where you can see an entire building. Water works very well, as do clouds. Of course, both of those, I guess, can be grouped in with the aforementioned nature subject. So all of these work very well for creating image mirrors. Shots with people in it typically don't work as well, but you never know. Sometimes you might find a scene where it does work well. Now, in terms of anticipating what type of image will work well as an image mirror, the more and more you do this, the more you kind of develop a sense for what type of photographs will lend themselves to this type of format. And in the end, you'll be able to actually sort of pre-visualize when you're out with your camera. You'll see a scene and you'll just know that it will work well as an image mirror. And so you might find yourself taking photographs specifically to use in an image mirror process later on in the post-processing part of your workflow. So for me, as a compositing artist, I actually use image mirrors a lot as the basis of a composite or as an element within a composite. So I might not stop at the basic image mirror. I might actually take it and further transform it to create something else out of it or use it in the background element of part of a collage or a composite. So I find them very satisfying in that regard. Now, they're very easy to create in Photoshop. All you have to do is make a copy of your layer and flip that so that it is, mirrored with the original. Increase the canvas size, either horizontally or vertically, depending on which way you want to create your mirror. And then just move that flipped reflected layer over and align it with the original. And there you go. Presto changeo. You have an image mirror. But what a lot of people don't know is you can also do the same thing in Lightroom using the print module, and more specifically by modifying print templates in the print module in Lightroom to create the basic mirrored effect. Now, in some cases, you may need to do a little bit of touch-up in Photoshop, and certainly you might need to proof the results in Photoshop just to make sure there are no pesky seams that are not showing up in Lightroom. But if you do it correctly, you can do the whole process in Lightroom and save your templates for future use with other images. And that is what our focus is for this week's show. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, the first step is to, of course, identify an image that you feel would work well for the mirrored image or reflected image interpretation. As I mentioned earlier, natural scenes tend to work very well. I have several images here taken in a very narrow canyon in Death Valley, California. And these are all ones that I feel would work very well. I've already processed these as black and white images. And let me actually click on the one we're going to use for this tutorial and go into the Develop module. Just pressing D on my keyboard to go from the grid view there of the library module into the Develop module. And if I press the Y key, it will give me a before and after view, and you'll see what the original looks like on the left, the original color image in this narrow slot canyon, and the final process version in black and white on the right. So what I've done here, just to sort of give you a little bit of background on my processing choices before we dive into the mirrored image effect, is that I have chosen to increase the contrast a bit. I've increased the shadow slider a bit just to make sure that these shadows do not get too dark here. I've also added a tone curve to darken down the very darkest tones. And of course, I have created a black and white interpretation. Now, there wasn't a lot of color information in this image to begin with, but what color information was there was primarily some very faint and subtle oranges and browns and some blue tones here. And so you can see what my choices were here in my black and white mix for creating a custom black and white interpretation of this image. I've also done some local adjustments to this image. Let's take a look at those. I have a gradient adjustment here, and let me just press O on the keyboard to show that gradient adjustment. So where you see the red overlay here, this semi-transparent red overlay, that is the area that is being affected by the gradient. And for this, I have slightly lightened the exposure, and I brought up the clarity a bit because I wanted to brighten up that center portion of the image. Now, if you're wondering how I have the gradient only affecting this part of the image here and not anything down below, it's because after I created the gradient, I clicked on the brush button here, and then I held down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows, and that allowed me to subtract areas from the gradient there. So this is how you can use the basic gradient tool and then paint away areas that you do not want to have affected by it. So a very, very useful technique here and attribute of the gradient panel. I'm just going to press O again on the keyboard to hide that red overlay. The next thing I did was I went to the elliptical gradient tool, or that radial gradient tool, and I created a gradient that darkened the outside of this ellipse. Now, we cannot see all of this ellipse here because it's extending out beyond the image. Let me actually go here to a kind of zoomed out version of the image, and here you can see the full ellipse here. If I hover over this, you can see the red area there, which indicates the area of the image that is being affected by that elliptical gradient or the radial gradient tool. Of course, I could always show that red overlay by simply pressing the O key on the keyboard, O for overlay. And by the way, the method that I used to get to this zoomed out view of the image was I just came over here and I chose 1 to 8 here as the view here. So this allows me to see the zoomed out view, which allows me to see the full shape of that radial gradient. Now, the reason that I'm placing it here on the edge here of the image, on the left edge, is because I know that eventually what I'm going to do with this shot is I am going to create a mirrored or reflected image. And so by placing it here, I know that this whole image is going to be flipped and reflected over on the left side. And so I'm really only interested in how it is affecting this side of the image here. Let me actually just go back to the fit on screen view, because I see this natural shape occurring here, this natural sort of curved shape, and I want to darken that outer curved shape of the image here on the right side of this image here, the original still image of this canyon view, because I know that what I'm going to do is create a copy of this and flip it over and reflect it over onto the left side, and that'll create a really nice view of the image. Now, of course, you can choose to apply some of these type of Lightroom adjustments after you've created the mirrored image, but since I know that this is what I'm going to do, I have chosen to apply these beforehand. The more that you do mirrored or reflected images, the better able you will be to pre-visualize the result and apply these sorts of adjustments to the single image before you create the mirrored version. All right, I'm going to go back to the library module here. And the first step is to create a virtual copy of your image. So I'm going to choose to right click here on my thumbnail, and I'm just going to choose create virtual copy. And we can see that here is the virtual copy right here. Next, what I want to do is I want to flip this, because I need to have this be the mirrored opposite of what it currently is. So to do that, you can either come up to the photo menu and choose flip horizontal, or if you're viewing the image in the loop view, which I would get to just by pressing E on the keyboard, I could then right click in the middle of the image and choose transform flip horizontal. And of course, it's going to rotate that or reflect that. Now, an easy way to get a preview of how this might look, and this is actually a good technique to use if you're not sure if a certain image would look good as a mirrored or reflected image, is to use the compare view feature. So I'm going to come down and click on the little triangle here to get my film strip showing again. And I'm going to click on the other image that I have selected here. This is the original image here. And then I'll hold down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows and click on the second view, which is now the virtual copy. And I'll just press C on the keyboard to go into the reflected view. And I'll press Tab to hide my side panels so I can get a slightly better view. Although now that I think about it, it actually looks better if the images are closer together. So I'll press Tab again to bring those side panels back. Now, this is actually opposite of what I was expecting to see, because what I really wanted to see was the curvature of this canyon structure here sort of mirrored, so I have this sort of round structure in the center, and I'm getting kind of the opposite of that. Although this does look interesting, and one of the things about mirrored images is that sometimes you never really know what you're going to get. You might have an idea what you're going to get and kind of an inkling of how it might look, but sometimes if you mirror it the opposite way, you get something totally unexpected. So this could potentially work out, but it's not really what I want to do. So one thing to understand about when you go into compare view is that the first image that you select in terms of the thumbnails here at the bottom is going to be the image on the left-hand side. It's going to be the image that is designated as the select. And then the second image that you select is going to be the candidate. So you can see here, if we look down at the thumbnails, that the first image that I selected was the original view, and that is highlighted in a little bit brighter tone of gray there. And the second image that I selected is highlighted in a slightly darker tone of gray. So, of course, one way around that is I could just come over here to the swap button, this button that has the XY with the opposing arrows, and then just click on that. And then it's going to swap the view there. It's going to basically make the second one here, down here in the film strip, the select, and the first one in the film strip is now the candidate. So this is actually more what I had in mind in terms of my pre-visualization of how this mirrored image might start to take shape. So I really like how this is looking here, and this really gives you an idea of how you might use the compare view in Lightroom to just sort of get a little bit of a preview of how an image might look as a mirrored image once you take it, create a virtual copy of it, and then flip that virtual copy to where it's flipped horizontally so it becomes a reflected view. Let's take a quick look at a couple of other images here. I'm going to click on one and then another one here. Now notice that I still have the original picture selected on the left here. And so what I'm going to do is just come down to the film strip and command click on that, which will deselect that. And now I have the two that I really want to see. So this is a close-up detail of some of the rock formations in this canyon. I think that this could work very well as an image mirror. Here's another one that is very, very similar to this. Actually, it's the same structure. So I can command click on that second one down here, and then I'll command click on that first one to get rid of it. And that is actually looking very, very cool as well. Let's do another one here. And then what I'm going to do is command click on that one there. That looks interesting. Let me just click on the swap button to see how it looks like that. That could also be a possibility. So I hope you get the idea here that by using the compare view in Lightroom, you can get a little bit of a preview of which images might work well as a mirrored or reflected image before you go to all the trouble of actually heading into the print module and creating that view. Okay, well, let's get started here in making our actual mirrored or reflected image. I'm going to come back to the picture that I started with here, and let me actually just press E on the keyboard. So just to recap what we've done so far, I have this original image of the canyon in Death Valley, and then here is the virtual copy that I have just chosen to flip horizontal. So what I want to do is have this panel be on the left side, and then this panel be on the right side. So I'm going to go over to the print module. And right now, my print module is just using the print template that I was using the last time that I was in here. And that happens to be the maximize size template here, which is one of the default Lightroom templates that ship with the program. So we're going to be using a different template here and actually modifying that print template. But the first thing that I want to mention is that in order to create a mirrored image here in Lightroom, what we're going to have to do is actually print to a JPEG file. And in order to make sure that the file is the size that we want it to be, we need to first go into the page setup dialog and specify the paper size that we're going to print to. So I'll just click here on page setup, and you can see that I have already chosen a Super B or 13 by 19 inch paper here, and that is what I'm going to be using. And I've also chosen the landscape orientation view. I'll just click OK to that. So right now, if I were to print this to an actual printer, it would be printed on a sheet of 13 by 19 paper. If I print it to a JPEG file, it's going to print out to a file that will be approximately 13 by 19 inches at whatever resolution I choose down in the print job panel over on the right side of the print module. So if you wanted to have this be a larger size image than 13 by 19 inches, what you would have to do is come into page setup, and under paper size, you'd have to come down to manage custom sizes and then create a brand new size that would be whatever size you wanted it to print at. I'm not going to go into that now because we don't really have time for that in this episode, but that is what you'd have to do. So in terms of setting this up to be a mirrored image, what I need to do is create a print template or a print layout that is essentially a diptych, because I want to have one image on the left side and another image on the right side. Now, of course, I could come over here and choose to modify this template here, the maximize size template, using the options in the layout panel, or I could choose another print template and modify that. And that is actually what I'm going to do here. So there is no diptych template in here, but if I look down here right underneath maximize size, there is one for a triptych. So I'm just going to click on that and put it into the triptych print template. Now let me come over here to my guides panel and click on show guides so you can see what's happening here. So basically what would happen is that if I clicked on the command key on Mac or the control key on Windows, it would add in different images, whatever I clicked on down here in the film strip view, and I would have this triptych. Now, in terms of how these images are arranged on the paper, this looks pretty lame right now, so this is really not what I want to do. So what I'm going to do is just click off of that, and again, I'll click on that first one, and now I'm going to start to modify this print template. So the very first thing I want to do is I want to change it from a triptych to a diptych. So I would do that by coming to the layout panel here, and under page grid, instead of 3 rows, which is what I have here, you can see that 1, 2, 3, I want that to be just 1 row. And then instead of 1 column, I need 2 columns, because the way this page is laid out, I'm going to have one image on the left-hand side and another image on the right-hand side. So I'll just move that slider until I get 2 columns. Next, I'm going to uncheck this keep square option down here, because that was just part of the triptych template that was saved as part of the default templates that Lightroom ships with. Now, next, what I want to do is change the size of the cells. I want the height of my cell here, and again, I'm working in the layout panel of the print module. This is on the right-hand side of the print module, for those of you who are listening to the audio version. And I'm going to change the height of that cell size to the maximum, because I want this image to basically fill the paper from top to bottom on the height. The other thing I'm noticing now is that this image here is actually the image that would be on the right-hand side of the paper. So I really want that to be the virtual copy. So I have the curve here coming up here on the left-hand side. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the command key and click on the thumbnail for that original image here, which you can see here at the beginning of my film strip. Okay, so first problem, it's not behaving as I want it to. So why is that? Well, the funny thing about the templates here in the Lightroom print module and the way that you select images in the print module is that the images are added not in the order that you select them, but in the order that they appear here in the film strip. So to change the ordering, I need to change the order of the images as they appear in the film strip. So I'm just going to click off of both of those images there, and I'm going to just take my virtual copy here and just drag it in front of the original image of that canyon scene. Now, I should mention here that I am using a collection for this. I do have these images in a collection, and working with collections is a great way to work if you're working on specific print projects, as I am here. So now you can see that I selected that image here, the virtual copy, and it is appearing on the left side of the paper. And if I hold down the command key on Mac or the control key on Windows, I get the other one showing up on the other side. All right, so now what I need to do is change the width of my cell. So I'll come back here to the layout panel and I will adjust the slider to change the width. And at a certain point, you can see that what happens is it stops increasing the width and then it starts to zoom in. So that tells me that I have kind of reached the edge there. So apropos zooming in, there is an option up here in the image settings panel for zoom to fill. So depending on the effect that you're going for, you may not want to have that checked. In my case, I am going to uncheck that and adjust that width for the cell size to get it to fit just like so. And maybe a little bit more like that. So far, so good. However, I still have way too much space between the images. Now, actually, before I fix that, let's kind of diverge here a little bit and say, well, maybe we don't want to create a true mirrored image where there's this seamless blend between the two photographs. Maybe we just want to create a regular diptych. How would we do that? Well, to do that, what I would do is come in and modify the margins here. Again, I'm working in the layout panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the numeric field for the left margin at the top there. And I'm just going to enter in 1.5. I'll tap the tab key to go to the next field, enter in 1.5, again, tab. So now I have margins of 1.5 inches all the way around. I'm going to come down here to the guides panel and I will uncheck show guides so I can get a sense of how this looks without those guides showing up. So that actually looks pretty cool. So this is how I might choose to create a look that was sort of more of a traditional diptych, where there was an obvious border between the two images, a separation between the two images. Now, if you get to this point and you really like the way this looks and you think you might want to be using this to create a diptych from two vertical images on a horizontal sheet of 13 by 19 paper, by all means, come over here to the template browser and click on that plus symbol and save that. So I'm just going to call this diptych 2 verticals 13 by 19 horizontal using appropriate abbreviations. And I save that into my folder here for 13 by 19 paper templates. And now this is a template that I can use at any time to easily drop in 2 vertical images and have a nice evenly spaced diptych template. Okay, well, let's get back to the main thrust of our demo here, which is how to create a mirrored image or a reflected image where you have a seamless blend between the left and the right half. So the first thing I'm going to do is reset my margins here to where there are no margins. I just want to have these set to be whatever the default is. And I'm going to adjust the cell size again. I'm going to make the height the maximum height that I can. And I'm going to make the width the maximum width that I can. Now, of course, remember, I do have zoom to fill turned off. There may be occasions where you want to have zoom to fill turned on, but in this case, I want to have it turned off. So I still have a bit of a gap between the images here. I'm going to modify that just by highlighting the width of the cell size, and I'm going to type in 8.5. Now that works well for this particular image and this particular paper size. Your mileage may vary, as the old car commercial saying goes. Now, that still doesn't get me really where I want to be, because obviously I don't want to have any margin between the two images. So one way to fix that is to adjust the left and right margins. Now, before I do that, let's show some additional information to give me a better sense of how much I might need to adjust those margins by. So down here in the guides panel, I'm going to turn on the show guides option. I had turned that off earlier. And one of the options that I do have checked here is to show the rulers. So I can see here that I have a 19-inch wide canvas here, or sheet of paper. And what I need to do is get it right here in the middle. So this is almost another inch. I've got a little bit of space here inside the cells that's not being taken up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to guesstimate that I'm going to adjust my left margin by 1.05 inches, and I will then press Tab to make the numeric field for the right margin active, and I'm going to enter in that same number, 1.05. Aha, there we go. Now that looks pretty good. Of course, we have this black line down the center, and that's because we are showing our guides right now, and it's showing the image cells. So right now I'm going to turn the Show Guides option back off, and that's looking pretty good. I actually like that quite well. So one thing I might choose to do here is, as I did earlier with my more kind of traditional diptych layout, I might choose to save this as a print template that would work for 2 vertical images arranged side by side on a horizontal orientation of a 13 by 19 sheet of paper. I'm not going to do that actually for this case because we did it earlier, but I'm just throwing that out there to hopefully get you thinking about it. So this looks pretty good. I'm really liking the way that this looks. So now what we're going to do is come down to the bottom of the panel here on the right-hand side of the print module, down to the print job panel. And what we want to do is, instead of printing to a specific printer, we want to print to a JPEG file. For the file resolution, you do want to choose a resolution that is adequate for what you want your image to be. And remember that the size of this image is going to be approximately 13 by 19. Well, not actually 13 by 19. If I show the guides again and we look at the rulers, it looks like it's going to be maybe 17 inches wide by almost 13 inches high there at 300 dpi. So the size of the image file that you're going to get really does depend on the size paper you are choosing, as I mentioned earlier. For print sharpening, you can choose a level, low, standard, or high. You can choose a media type, glossy or matte. I'm just going to leave that set to glossy there. And you can, of course, choose a JPEG quality. Since I want this to be a maximum quality file, I'm just going to set that to 100. And then I'm just going to choose print to file. And in the save file dialog, I'm just going to call this DV Canyon Mirror. And I guess I'll just call that -1, and we'll click Save. Up in the upper left, you'll see a progress bar for preparing the print job, and it should not take very long for Lightroom to save that file. Now, you could just choose to print this directly to your printer, but rather than do that, the reason that I chose to save out a JPEG file first is I wanted to show you some potential problems that could arise when using this method here. So let's pop over into Photoshop and take a look at this file. So here's the file in Photoshop. Looks great, looks pretty cool. As you can see, natural rock forms really do lend themselves quite well to the mirrored or reflected image format. But let's zoom up to 100%, Command Option 0 on a Mac or Control Alt 0 on Windows. And check this out in a close-up view. Now, it may be hard to see on the video version that's posted on the TheFIX website, but there is this very thin, like pixel-wide seam, hairline seam there where we can see this little white line. Let me zoom up closer so you can see that. So there it is. Unfortunately, when using the standard print layout templates in Lightroom and arranging it as you saw me do earlier, it does result in this little seam here. Now, if you have Photoshop, which of course you do have if you have the photography plan of the Adobe Creative Cloud, you can of course easily retouch this just by using the spot healing brush here and dragging over that to retouch that. And by the way, while I'm in here, let me just share this really cool trick. I can never resist sharing a cool trick, and after all, what better place to share a cool trick than on a podcast devoted to Lightroom, Photoshop, and post-processing? So here's the cool trick. If I click at the top here and then come down to the bottom of where I want the retouching to be, so I'm going to come down to this bottom part of the line here, hold the Shift key down and then click again, it draws a straight line between those 2 points and fills in the gaps. So that works with any of the painting tools in Photoshop. Again, click, shift click to fill it in. Obviously, it's having some trouble here on this real narrow area. So that might be a part where I'm going to have to come in and with a much smaller brush come in and manually retouch that, not relying on any fancy keyboard shortcut. So I'm not going to retouch this whole thing. I think you get the idea of how you might be able to fix this. Okay, so it's easy enough to fix this here with some moderate retouching using the spot healing tool in Photoshop. However, what if you don't have Photoshop? What if you just have Lightroom? Or what if you want to set the entire thing up to where you don't even have to bring it into Photoshop? You just want to be able to do everything in Lightroom without any hairline thin little white lines at the seam between the 2 images. Well, there is a way to do that. Let's go back to Lightroom and check it out. All right, before I leave this particular setup here in the print module, I want to take a note of what my cell size is here. It's 12.69 inches by 8.46 inches. And I'm just going to jot that down on a piece of paper so I have that handy and can refer to it. What I need to do is create a custom print template. So what I'm going to do is come up here to the layout style section at the top, and currently I'm set to single image or contact sheet, which is what you would do if you're printing a single image or a contact sheet, obviously, or a diptych or a triptych or something like that. Anything where you have multiple images arranged on the same page. I'm going to choose custom package. The nice thing about the custom package is it allows you to really customize how the cells are arranged on the page, whether or not they overlap with other images. So you have a lot more freedom. So since I had an existing template active when I chose to create custom package, if I click on one of these, I can see that the size is almost exactly the same. It's 12.69 by 8.5, so that's close enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the virtual copy image down here in the film strip, and I'm going to drag that up onto the left-hand cell. I'm going to make the right-hand cell active, and I'm going to drag in the original image, which actually is, of course, the right-hand panel of the image. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on that right-hand cell, and I'm going to choose Send to Front, just to make sure that this cell is the frontmost element here in my print layout, so that if I wanted to, it would overlap on top of the other cell, as you can see here. Let me actually undo that. Now, if I click off that cell, you can see that I still have this faint white line between the two. So what I'm going to do is just bring that in ever so slightly. Still have a faint white line. So let me bring the left-hand cell in, and I'm just dragging this over. Unfortunately, the arrow keys on the keyboard do not work for adjusting the cell there, but that looks pretty good. So before I save this as a template here in my template browser, let's export out a JPEG and see if that works to hide that little thin white line along the seam of the 2 images. Just double checking my settings here. I'm still set to 300 ppi. I'm printing to a JPEG file, and I'll click Print to File. And I'm just going to call this DV Canyon Mirror number 2 and save it out. Okay, it's done, so let's go over to Photoshop and check it out. All right, here is the file in Photoshop, and let's zoom up to 100% view and check that out. Shortcut for that is Command-Option-0 on Mac or Control-Alt-0 on Windows. So, as you can see, at 100% here, we have no seam, and we don't have to do any retouching at all. So the moral of the story here is that you do have to proof this out and make sure it's working and not leaving any seam. Because in Lightroom, you won't see any seams, but you might see seams once you get up to 100% view in Photoshop. So you do have to check that out in Photoshop just to double check that there are no seams. Now, a couple of things that could throw you off here, or at least throw off this process, are the setting here for grid snap. I have mine set to off, but there are options here to have it snap to the different cells or snap to the grid. I chose to set mine to off. And sometimes you do have to go through a process of trying this out several times and kind of nudging it and selecting the cell and nudging it a little bit closer, etc., etc. So just realize that you might have to do this a few times until you get a result where when you view it in Photoshop, there actually are no seams, as we see right here. Once you do arrive at that result where there are no seams, by all means, come over to the template browser here in the Lightroom print module, click on the plus symbol and save that out as a template, because that is one that you know will work and produce no little fine hairline seams between the images, and you can use over and over again. So there you have it. That is how you can modify some of the existing print templates that come with Lightroom in order to create mirrored or reflected images. I hope that you found that useful and interesting. I hope that it inspires you to go out and try to create mirrored images from your own photographs. I also hope that if you've never played around with modifying print templates in Lightroom's print module before, I hope that this gives you enough information to go out and modify templates to create whatever templates you may need for your own projects. So that is our show for this week. Remember that you can always subscribe to the audio version of TheFIX on iTunes, or you can also check out the video version or find a downloadable audio version on the website, thisweekinphoto.com/TheFIX. I'm Seán Duggan. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time on TheFIX.